Thank you for joining our webinar on Innovating through Knowledge Management. This is an event hosted by the Legal, Technology and Innovation Committee, Association of Corporate Counsel, and the Centre for Legal Innovation. My name's Asha McDermott and I'm part of the LTIC ACC Committee. We also have Terry Modishead, Executive Director of the Centre for Legal Innovation on the call, who will be moderating the questions and closing the session. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. I'd like to introduce our two wonderful presenters, Katrina Gowans, National Legal Operations Lead at Origin Energy, and Caroline Austin, Director, Knowledge and Practice Support at global law firm K&L Gates. Katrina has been the National Legal Operations Lead for Origin Energy since 2018, a role she describes as helping the Origin legal team manage change. One of her career highlights was to successfully lead the Origin legal team in implementing a fully integrated matter management and document management system, underpinned by a transformation program to change the way the team worked. We also have Caroline Austin, whose focus is on the intersection between legal innovation and technology, knowledge management, and design thinking. As well as being the Director of Knowledge and Practice Support, she is also co-lead of the K&L Gates Australian Innovation Committee and a founding member of the firm's Global Innovation Committee. Starting her career as a commercial litigator, Caroline brings over 25 years' experience in legal knowledge management. One of her career highlights was being invited to Kenya in 2019 to facilitate a design thinking based hack day for the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime and the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, Kenya. Now, before we start, I just wanted to raise a couple of things. ACC Australia is the Association for In-House Counsel. If you're an in-house counsel or a government legal counsel and aren't already a member of this association, then I strongly encourage you to join this fantastic organisation and take advantage of the many benefits it offers. Terry will say a bit more about the Centre for Legal Innovation at the end of the call. Secondly, I just wanted to remind you that we have both a Q&A functionality and a comments section. So can I ask that you put your questions to presenters in the Q&A section? And if you just want to make some more general comments, put that in the chat. I'm now going to hand over to Caroline and Katrina. Thank you.
Thanks, Asha. It's Katrina here. Hello, everybody. My name's Katrina Gowans. I'm thrilled to be joined by Caroline, and we're really excited to talk to you about a topic we are both very passionate about, knowledge management. It may not always have been super sexy, but it's definitely back in fashion, and I think it's something that in-house legal teams are recognising more and more as an incredible asset. So we're here today to take you through, I'm going to bring up the agenda on screen, hopefully, what knowledge management is and isn't. And the hint here is it's more than just precedents. We're going to talk about why it's important. We're going to give you a bit of the how, like getting down and dirty about what is the business case for knowledge management? What are some principles that any sort of in-house legal team should keep in mind when they're trying to build a business case? We're then going to have a bit of a thought process around what's the relationship between knowledge management, digital transformation, and sustaining that culture of continuous improvement and innovation. And then finally, we're going to leave you with a few really practical tips and a bit of a roadmap for implementing knowledge management for your team. So with that, we're very happy to take questions. We'll keep an eye on them as we go, but we've got a bit to get through. So Caroline, over to you to kick us off.
Thank you, Katrina. Thank you, Asha. It's just a delight to be with you, talking about my favourite subject that I could certainly talk about underwater, which is the intersection of innovation and knowledge management. So for those of you who don't know, I spent a number of years as a sessional lecturer at the University of Technology in Sydney in their postgraduate Masters of Digital Information in the speciality of knowledge management strategies. So very excited to share this with you. What is KM and what isn't KM? Let's start there. these are a couple of classic definitions of knowledge management. There are others, right? It's a multifaceted discipline, but I thought these would probably resonate most with our topic today. So if we start off with the idea that knowledge management is actually the art of creating commercial value from intangible assets. Okay, and building that out a little bit with this second definition, it's a formal structured initiative within an organisation that's really designed around improving, creating, distributing and using, very importantly, using knowledge in an organisation. So it's about turning corporate knowledge into corporate value. So if you think about that and sit with that definition for a moment, where you are in your practice, it's clearly a very broad one, right? It's clearly, as Katrina said, broader than knowledge purely in the sake of knowledge databases or precedent databases. There's more to it than that. So if you think about the concept as including those things, because they are certainly very much still core deliverables for knowledge management, precedents and knowledge banks, right? But the real opportunity is to unlock more. It's about tapping into the day-to-day knowledge and experience of your organisation to better empower action. There is a sense in which, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, there has to be a reason to collect the knowledge that you're collecting. Nobody wants to collect knowledge and have it sit gathering dust in some database. There needs to be a demand for it as well. So it's about calibrating the balance between what your organisation is looking for and the content that you can provide. So a key question that we can ask ourselves then is, how can we find opportunities to add value to that intellectual capital of your organisation through knowledge management? And there's a few little signposts that should help us to be able to understand when we're kind of in that zone. A key question might be, for example, that you're looking around an initiative, say an on-demand self-service legal solution for your internal customers. You might be looking at whether or not you can actually unlock access to your legal knowledge in innovative ways. Maybe you're looking at chatbots, maybe you're looking at expertise automation. These are knowledge issues. We're in the knowledge management zone here. Another example, if you're looking at data management, data governance, data analytics, if you're looking to surface insights about your relevant area of law in which you practice, or how your team is going in that practice, trends and signals that you can pick up. Or even just guides to better legal decision making. Those things are in the knowledge zone. You might be talking about integration of systems increasingly, so one system talks to another, and how are you going to categorize your information and your data so that it actually speaks one to the other? Again, we're talking about knowledge management here. Whether you're thinking about introducing matter debriefs so that after a major matter you can sit with your team and go, well, what went well? What didn't go so well? What can we learn about for the next time? Again, knowledge. So anytime you're really engaged in a project around maybe unsiloing silos within your organisation, we often talk at Canal Gates about dot connecting. Knowledge managers and innovators are in the business of connecting dots across the legal ecosystem, right? Internally as well as externally. This is, when talking about collaboration, talking about building trust within your organisation. Trust is just a key component of knowledge. So this is the way you can think about a much broader opportunity to be able to implement a knowledge management plan for your organisation. So I'm just going to stop there because I do talk about this a lot, and I'm going to hand over to Katrina just to ask you, Katrina, if you can just share maybe some examples that you've come across in your practice around where you've been able to see knowledge management playing a role.
Absolutely. So I think you've already mentioned a few of them. So having a document management system, which is something that we did at Origin, and I know lots of in-house legal teams are, facing that challenge at the moment, whether they're in an old sort of email document management filing system world, whether they use an enterprise-wide one like SharePoint or a more bespoke sort of legal one, we use NetDocuments, but thinking about how you use that document management system so that it's searchable and a good repository for team knowledge. I said it's not just precedents, but precedents is a key part. So how your team thinks about developing precedents, and I guess, talking about connecting the dots. So how do you use all of your intelligence and experience from matters you've worked on to build the most future-proof precedent that you can in a particular area? And then there's probably the less formal things like using a company intranet site for guidance notes or FAQs or some self-help tools for the business, like capturing them and putting them somewhere is knowledge management. And then the very, very informal, but just having a little knowledge corner for your team, maybe in a weekly catch-up to share something that you've learned. That in itself is knowledge management and can be really effective, very admin light, but I find lawyers really love that opportunity. Thanks, Carolyn.
I love that. I love the idea of actually making knowledge management part of your daily practice, because the more you can bake it in, the more effective you can be. And as you say, not adding those additional layers of admin.
Yeah.
In knowledge management theory, they sometimes talk about trying to build windmills and not treadmills, things that are going to...
I like that. I'm going to write that down.
They're going to just power themselves without
great.
Intervention, because the last thing you want to do is have people filling out forms to get stuff into your knowledge base, and then that becomes a barrier to sharing. Maybe in the chat, if the people who are listening could just throw up some things that come to your mind when you're thinking about knowledge management. Is it intranets? Is it playbooks? Is it sort of lunch and learns? What knowledge, I guess we could call them knowledge initiatives or interventions, are you seeing play out particularly? Shout out to my in-house people. What are you seeing, and what do you think of in that space? So while that's happening, I might just go on to our next item, which is, why is knowledge management important? The benefits are, I'm clearly going to be enthusiastic about the benefits of KM. It helps the lawyer and it helps the organisation. Well, how? It's going to help with the more for less dilemma that we're all constrained with at the moment, which means that we find our areas of operation broadening, the ways in which we need to support our organisations, be they law firms or be they in-house teams, are growing. And unfortunately, our budgets are not growing in the same way. And so we find ourselves having to make choices around what we can support and how we can support it better. So in that environment, if you're looking to drive efficiency, if you're looking to improve processes, if you're looking at ways in which you might be able to democratise access to legal knowledge, and those are things that are going to drive benefits for your team. Any way you can really leverage prior work product to solve a problem that you've got today is going to help make you more efficient. It's going to reduce your costs, but the benefit of knowledge management is that you should also be able to use it to drive quality as well, and mitigate risk. Faster turnaround, if you can grab something that someone else has done and be able to use that effectively. And Katrina, I think really importantly, freeing lawyers from routine, repetitive tasks that we did not go to law school to do, but we've all been through those horrible tasks where we feel like a hamster running on a wheel. We don't want to do those things. We want to be able to free up our time to be able to focus on higher level work and just increase satisfaction, increase retention, frankly, keep our people, our good people on board, so that they can feel less exhausted.
Yeah. And at Origin, we sort of picked up on that theme a lot, and we just talked about having, using our time, our precious time, to be more solutions focused rather than, and, playing from the same playbook, picking up something where somebody's already done it rather than, reinventing the wheel.
Yep, absolutely. And there does seem to be a bit of a demand out there. I noticed that the CLOC, and those who don't know, CLOC is the Corporate Legal Operations Consortium. They did a State of the Industry survey back in May this year. And interestingly, they found that 79% of legal operations teams include knowledge management among their responsibilities. But only 13% of those legal ops departments ranked their maturity level in KM as high or leading. So that tells you that there's a lot of demand out there in the legal ops world to get across knowledge management. It's part of the remit. And yet there's also an incredible opportunity to grow your understanding and become more mature about how you apply KM.
Great. All right. Thanks, Carolyn. Hopefully now people have a great sense of what knowledge management is, a really broad scope, and also why it's important for in-house legal teams for a range of reasons, a lot to do with sort of time and efficiencies. But the bigger challenge is really how to implement a good knowledge management strategy, how to build a business case for it. And I think, having spoken to lots of people, thought about this topic for a while, I don't think there's a single strategy that will work for all in-house legal teams alike. So Carolyn and I can't give you a playbook and then the call's over. I think you do really need to take into account various factors, including your corporate strategy and what its approach to sort of knowledge assets is, the composition of your team. Is it just you, or are there lots of people, maybe in lots of different countries or cultures that you're trying to reach? What's the technology available? And what's your budget and resourcing options? Do you have someone who can take it on as a dedicated mantle, like we were fortunate enough to at Origin, in my role, or are you asking a lawyer to sort of step up to the plate and try and sort of manage this? Notwithstanding those sort of different factors, I think there are some common principles that apply. And so we're going to talk to each of them now. I think there's probably, you can distill it down into 3 principles. So I'll talk to each of them. So the first principle, and I think really the starting point, is about developing and embedding a culture that's focused on knowledge management and led, with strong leadership. So I've found that, if you want to embed a new way of working that's focused on knowledge management, you really need to think about that cultural piece that supports the commitment that you're making, because it is a commitment in terms of time and resources before you sort of get into the mechanics. And again, culture will depend on the team. But it's really a great idea to sort of think about that and have a really open and honest conversation, whether it's with yourself or with a broader team, about what is your team's commitment to knowledge management. And by way of example, at Origin, we sort of undertook a financial year plan around knowledge management. And we wrote a list at the start of the year to call out what success would look like for us if we moved to a knowledge-based way of working. And it was really powerful, because it helped us articulate what we meant when we talked about a successful culture, because it can be quite a vague concept. But some of the things that we listed as sort of a success would be, I always choose to start with the knowledge that we have. So before I sort of put pen to paper, I ask someone, I search our databases, I go onto our intranet. I provide all my legal services when I'm fully informed from our knowledge base, so I'm making sure it's consistent. I demonstrate use of our precedents or guidance notes where we have them. I always share my knowledge from learning, so that continuous improvement piece. And I advocate for this culture with my colleagues, meaning that if I see someone who's not demonstrating those things, I sort of raise it with them and remind them why it's important. The cultural piece needs to be supported by strong leadership. So you really need a leader on board that's prepared to sort of put this front and centre, be it in your team meetings, be it in terms of investment in time, and really drive the team to sort of some successful, a successful journey around this piece. So trying to, whether it be your general counsel or whoever's appointed to sort of lead this challenge within your team, it's really clear that they're on board as well and focused on making this a priority for the team. Carolyn, did you have an experience at K&L Gates that you wanted to share?
Yes. I think, first of all, that idea of having a team-based almost manifesto, if you will, about how you're going to ensure that you continue the behaviour that's going to drive your culture is really important. I couldn't overestimate the importance of leadership. I know that for many of us who've been in the knowledge management game for a while, across many different firms, you do get a sense that when the leaders show up, you can really, you can really hit the ground running. If the leaders don't show up, if they give you lip service, but they don't actually be present, it's very difficult. So how do you get the leaders engaged, and how do you reach out to those key stakeholders? I think is a really good question to ask at the beginning. You and I talked about the importance of trust, Katrina. So the ensuring that, I mean, some cultures are, fertile ground for knowledge management because you've already got a good culture of trust. And if that's not the case, why should I trust somebody who I don't know with my precious piece of research that I spent lots of time and invested in? What are they going to do with it? How are they going to use it? And if you can break down those kind of barriers to ensure that people are comfortable, they trust each other, then you've got the beginnings of a knowledge management initiative.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great call out around trust. The second principle that I wanted to draw on was around sort of designing clear, I guess, infrastructure and processes about how you're going to capture and share your knowledge. And this is really where the innovation piece can sort of shine and come to the fore. When you turn your mind to sort of what infrastructure you have or want to develop, you have to think about what is a way that is I guess includes all of the lawyers in your team, that's accessible, that's not too admin heavy. Carolyn mentioned before, we want to make windmills, not treadmills. I'm gonna use that, Carolyn. Lawyers hate more admin, and nobody wants to be doing stuff for the sake of it. So think about, are there tools that you can use that really drive those efficiencies, capture that knowledge effectively. So some examples that I mentioned before, having a great document management system, but it's not just about having the technology, it's making sure that, for example, your lawyers are trained regularly about how to use the search function effectively, so that when they're looking for a piece of knowledge, they know how to do it and they know how to find it. Really important. Similarly, having some guidance notes I've found can be really helpful to capture things that are perhaps in the past happened by word of mouth or just handed down from a manager to a lawyer. It's fabulous if you can actually just put pen to paper, because often that will really just add a layer of transparency to that process, and it really sort of helps share that information and I guess, really firm it up. And then the other one is sort of, have you got things like approvals processes for things like precedents where they need to be reviewed by somebody? And is everybody clear about what that process is, so that there's a sort of a standard level of approval and everybody's on the same page? I think it feeds probably into your comment, Caroline, around trust, because people need to trust in the process. So the process needs to be transparent to do that. There's lots of great innovative tools out there that can sort of help you either capture, draft, prepare, manage workflows that support all those different types of processes. Caroline, at K&L Gates, what sort of things do you use in this space?
A plethora of things, document management systems, collaboration portals. The point that you make about the protocols and the reliance that lawyers know that they can place on content is really important. So, for example, we have different ways in which we treat a precedent, which is obviously a model document or clause that's drafted and signed off by our best professional experts, versus a knowledge document, which might be an example that is really useful. We did this once, but it's frozen in time. It's not updated the way a precedent is. So, being very, very transparent on the face of a piece of content around the date of currency, who's responsible for it, who can you go talk to about it, and all of that sort of stuff can be baked into your protocols, and that's really useful.
We just to interrupt, we actually that was one of my great learnings at Origin. So we do have a pretty good bank of precedents, but they're really sacred, and they're quite hard to change because they have a big impact to the broader business. But one thing when we implemented our document management system that we did was the lawyers were like, I always go back to this contract that I negotiated with counterparty X because it had a great indemnity clause in it. Where do I put that? What do I capture that? And so what we designed for our lawyers also in the sort of our document management system, not just the precedents library, but we also had what I called a favourites library, where lawyers could just tag their favourite documents that maybe they always go to or always use. They're visible for other lawyers to see, but it's more for those lawyers to sort of just go back to find their favourites very quickly in our document management system, because they know that that's something which they sort of hold on to and is very valuable for them in terms of knowledge.
That's lovely, and there's so much you can get out of that sort of a favourite or user-defined tagging system.
Yeah.
In terms of a newbie who starts and thinks, how does so-and-so like their documents to be done? What's there?
Carrie's going to interrupt us with some questions from the floor.
I do. I have a question that's spot on. So
yeah,
I thought it would be really good to ask the question here, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, but it's around ownership and accountability. So going directly to the points that you were making about, some being sacrosanct and some kind of being knowledge. Who ends up with the responsibility? In a way, how is that assigned when you've got that centralized hub that folks are drawing information from? And David, I hope I've done that question justice. If I haven't, I know you'll let me know.
Why don't I go first, Carolyn?
Yeah,
and then you have a go. So I think it depends on the knowledge and where it's housed. For us at Origin, we have a legal team document management system, and the precedents that sit within that are owned by Origin Legal. We put a legal team, so we've got 3 sort of centres next to it. So rather than an individual, we say this is our corporate team. So the head of corporate is effectively the nominee to make sure that that precedent is reviewed regularly and updated, and we have sort of a date when it was updated. Some of them don't need to be revisited that often, like confidentiality agreements. It's pretty stable law, but some of them, for example, we've got, retail customer facing energy agreements. They get changed every couple of years due to sort of the changes in law that happened. We're really lucky with the materials that we have on our intranet site that are more around sort of FAQs and guidance notes. We use sort of SharePoint now, and it's got a trusted score rating. So you can actually see when the materials have been updated. The materials have an owner, which is in our legal team, and so they are accountable. So I think it is really, it's a challenge, but I think you have to tailor it to the type of knowledge that you're talking about. And it also has to be, I guess, not too onerous that the lawyers spend their life updating a spreadsheet. So, I don't have the answer for everything, but that's how we've sort of managed our core pieces of knowledge. Oh, Caroline,
yes,
what have you seen?
It's really interesting. And yes, I echo, we don't have all the answers here, but we can share our experience. I think that it's really important to have on the face of, I'm going to talk about my precedents and my knowledge assets slightly differently. Talking about a precedent, that is going to be kind of your highest reliance mark. So your subject matter experts should have had their eyes across that and had something to say about the settling of that. And it should be very clear from the document who those people were. And there should be, as Katrina said, somebody who basically is the owner of that. That's really important in terms of accountability and professional responsibility. In terms of the knowledge stuff, I think it's much more highly contextual. Whether it's a valuable piece of knowledge will depend on, whether you can see from your document management system who has created that knowledge. Maybe you know that they're very junior or that they're extremely senior and they have a lot of expertise to share. So that trust function is going to be, like all knowledge, highly contextual in that kind of sort of context. You need the more you know about the background and the surrounding reasons why that was collected and tagged, the more you'll understand about how much reliance you can place on it.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Terry. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about in terms of the processes and infrastructure, Carolyn?
Just mentioned knowledge champions.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. So, I mean, coming from a large global law firm, I guess we have the advantage of some resources. So we do have precedent steering committees across the to understand what we're going to be developing. We're not going to be spending time developing in terms of knowledge, etc., which is really helpful. We have practice support lawyers, PSLs. Shout out to my PSLs. They are amazing. And get yourself a PSL if you can, because they're brilliant. I know not everybody has the opportunity to do that. But yeah, a lawyer, a practicing lawyer who's at the coalface, who can be a designated knowledge champion. You don't have to call them that. You can think of something else to call them, but they're going to be your conduit of understanding what's going on in the practice group, where they need new knowledge assets. You can reach back out to them to get their opinion on something that you might be thinking about launching. So they're really important in the scheme of things as well.
Yeah, and I think in the in-house space, that concept of champions certainly applies. And I think, depending on the size of the team, people will recognise within their own teams that there are some people that just gravitate towards being really interested in, law firm updates in new areas and happy to share them and can sort of synthesise that information and process it. I think it is a skill that all in-house lawyers need to develop. So there's certainly an opportunity there as well for sort of some buddying up, perhaps, if you recognise someone that's really strong in that area, to sort of try and bring some others along for the journey, because I think it is, in an in-house space, something that everybody needs to share, even though there are people that have that skill set that's certainly bent towards it.
Yeah, you can when people are sort of onboarding new starters as well, it's a great time to talk to them about knowledge, and then you'll often find those people who have a natural affinity for it as well.
Yeah, that's right. The third principle, before we get too off track, was really just to be thoughtful about how you populate and contribute to your team's knowledge. Like, we started this session, knowledge, it's a vast beast, but you really do need to be thoughtful about, where you want to hone your team's sort of focus and attention. And I think you only do that, though, once you've sort of got the cultural piece, once you've got some of the processes in place, then you can sort of start to have a serious conversation about the knowledge that you do value as a team. I think there's sort of two broad categories of knowledge as I sort of see it. The first is we'll call it strategic knowledge, or sort of more formal knowledge, which we've sort of touched on, things that are key documents that your team identifies are really going to help them deliver legal services well, like precedents or guidance notes, self-help tools. There's lots of innovation tools in this space around building contracts, designing workflows, project planning, and they can all help there, and they're terrific. There's also, though, the organic knowledge, which, again, we've talked about, which is really that incidental knowledge that your team acquires just through their day-to-day work and moving around the company and learning different things about an area of law or your business. And it's quite important to sort of capture that, but you don't want it to be stifling. It needs to be more free-flowing. So often the innovation tools or the infrastructure that you'll have to capture those knowledge should be a bit more light touch. So we use things at Origin, like using our virtual meeting board, where people can just sort of flag an issue that they want to talk about at a team meeting, or using a group chat to sort of share a link to an article. Can be quite sort of free-flowing ways of just sharing that more organic knowledge without sort of stifling the sharing of ideas.
Agree. It's really important to be able to do that, and that's where, again, you come back to creating that value that's going to add to your corporate value by just getting the fact that there's these tiny little pieces of knowledge out there that are so critical.
That's right. Thanks, Caroline. I think we're up to over back to you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the relationship between, so I'm now on to the fourth point of our agenda, the relationship between KM, digital transformation, and sustaining a culture of continuous improvement and innovation. So it's those three sort of points of KM, digital transformation and innovation, essentially. We found that in our team at K&L Gates, we are now responsible for a wide range of key service areas, which include all of those things. So it's working out how are you going to ensure that you're connecting dots between digital adoption and transformation, the innovation piece, which is, you could talk about it as creating new knowledge, and then being able to ensure that your operational knowledge management continues to function across your finite resources. Change management is a big piece of that as well when you're looking at digital transformation, obviously, when you're looking at being able to share knowledge and being able to drive innovation. How do you resource the implementation of these things when you have got increasingly complex structures of who's responsible for what? So in your legal team, for example, you may be working very closely with the procurement team, you may be working with IT, you may be working with marketing, and all of them will have something to say about your digital transformation project or your broader innovation initiative that you're running. As we collect more and more data as well, with the flight to digital, it's going to open up more opportunities for knowledge to tap into, finding and using that data to surface new insights. So for example, 5 years ago, we didn't have electronic conveyancing. Now we do. And so now we're finding that there is a lot of digital data that's being generated, much of it sort of centrally located. We can't necessarily pull it down, but within each of our organisations, we can start to track that data more than we ever could before. And that's opening up the ability to surface a whole bunch of new insights there as we move to more and more collaboration portals, document automation that enables you to think about documents not as facsimiles of a paper page, but as data in sequence, right? It allows you to be able to extract that data and integrate it for more insights as well. So there is a more and more a relationship between these three areas that's really very complex. It's very difficult to sometimes separate. There are a lot of people in this space in your organisation that will not be in your team. So it comes down to obviously collaboration is key. Again, you've got to break down the silos. It's also really important to understand how each is going to bring its own value. There is diversity not only of the background, but also, of course, your lawyers working very closely with your allied legal professionals who have different professional backgrounds, who can bring some value to this space. And so those walls are starting to break down a little bit, I think. And that is going to mean that it's much more complex. There's a lot more influencing that you need to do. There's a lot more conversations that you need to have. But at the end of the day, I think the solutions are going to be so much richer as a result. So really, that's what I wanted to say to set the scene on that. Katrina, did you have any examples from how you're doing things at Origin?
We've sort of touched on it, but a great way is, I think, just keeping people accountable and building that transparency piece. So we mentioned sort of using the virtual sort of whiteboard at the team meetings to just check in with the team if there were sort of deliverables around knowledge management or people tipping things in or maintaining it. Using that to sort of help keep the team on track and keep sort of sharing that, those updates as you go can be quite a fluid but, dynamic way of building that sort of engagement and change management piece.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are working more and more to make sure that there are multiple channels that you can do that in. When if your organisation is global as well, or it's national, you've got different offices in remote geographical locations talking to each other. And of course, now we still have, although we've come out of lockdown, yay, I think, virtual remote working is here to stay. So at least in some way or another. So you need to be able to connect people virtually as well as around the water cooler, which is why I love your idea of the virtual message board. It's fantastic. Okay, are we on to practical tips?
I was going to talk about just the measuring success. I've got another example, if I can.
Oh, thank you. Yes, please.
That's okay, because I think a part of change management that really helps spur people along, is having, a vision or where you're trying to get to, and thinking about how you measure your journey and sort of complete that feedback loop with the team as you go. And so I thought, you know, in the confines of this sort of confidential session, I was going to share what we did at Origin to show you that there really are no bounds for how you want to sort of measure knowledge management, and you can get creative. Who said lawyers don't do metrics? What we did, so we actually were very committed to knowledge management as a way of working, that we put our team bonuses, our KPI, on the line for a financial year. And at the start of the year, we came together and we made some of those commitments that I referred to at the start about what is success going to look like. We sort of did the same process for what is the, you know, the infrastructure and processes that we want to make sure we have in place. And then what are the kind of things that we want to populate or contribute. And every month I asked the lawyers to add different activities that they'd done in each of those three categories to a spreadsheet. We pulled out a few examples that we shared at our national team meeting monthly so that people could get a sort of a flavour and an idea for the different things going on. I had a bit of a role predominantly, I guess, in setting the picture of the culture, but then it was very much up to sort of the local leaders to sort of champion that, and also helping with the infrastructure piece and the document management system. But really, you know, continuing the culture, asking the questions about the infrastructure and the processes and testing it, and then populating and contributing to those conversations was very much in the hands of our lawyers. And what we did was we got to the end of the year, and based on the activity that the lawyers had reported, we asked ourselves, had some of us been doing some of the things some of the time? Had, you know, most of us been doing most of it most of the time, or had all of us been doing it all of the time? And around that, we were able to sort of come up with a percentage for whether we met our threshold, target, or stretch. And we were able to sort of score ourselves for the team as a whole, and then sort of allocate the target for our team. So, I mean, it was quite, it was using language, not numbers, to start with, but because we had quite specific definitions of what success was, you know, we felt very confident putting those results in front of, you know, firstly my general counsel and then our CEO to say this is where the team's got to in terms of the plan that we had, you know, last July, and where we've got to in June this year. And it was really, I think, because, you know, we had that structure in place, it meant we were all very much pulling in the same direction. We were able to sort of talk about it monthly and check in, and it really did help build that change management piece and drive success for the team.
And there was there transparency around that as well, in terms of having those regular conversations? People understood that was going to be the process, and so they were buying into and getting engaged in that on the way.
That's
and
right.
Then who was sitting around the table when these, you know, the KPI questions were coming together and identifying where you were as a team on that?
Yeah, sure. So initially, to sort of set up the framework, that was something that I guess I put pen to paper with sort of some general counsel input, and then our sort of stakeholders are our senior leadership team. So they all sort of contributed, and then we delivered it to the team, sought some feedback, but it was very well received. And then it was the same at the end of the financial year. We kind of came back to them and said, this is what we're seeing. This is where I think, based on all of the, you know, the data points that the lawyers have given me, this is where I think that we've landed. If there were sort of concerns or questions, we talked about them, but it was relatively easy to agree because we had such sort of rich data set from the lawyers about the activity that they'd been undertaking.
That's brilliant, really fantastic.
Yeah.
We have seen a number of different ways in which this has kind of been played out across different law firms, as you're probably aware. You have some firms who have actually set a quota of hours around time to be spent on knowledge management. I don't do that. Not a believer for various reasons in setting quotas of hours, but I can see that it sometimes does, you know, sort of drive behaviour. But what we do is measure the amount of time that's spent by lawyers in creating knowledge assets, in developing, precedents and knowledge initiatives, and we follow that closely. People write their time down to that. We're able to then surface the the deliverables, because it's not just about the time spent, it's also about, well, what did you achieve in the time that you spent, and then be able to feed that back to the leadership, the senior leadership in the firm. And then it perhaps in an informal way then goes into the mix in terms of performance reviews.
Yeah.
The other measure, of course, when talking about metrics, can be usage that you derive out of your systems, but that's much more of a quantitative measure rather than the qualitative stuff that you've been talking about.
Yeah, interestingly, I mean, we do have a few measures for things like the use of precedents in our business, which can, it's sort of an after the fact measurement. So, you know, you put in the effort to design the template, for example, and then afterwards you can see how many people are kind of using it, so not having to come to you. And you can do sort of some rough numbers. So an example we had was people using our confidentiality agreements, you know, the number of times that people had to come to legal for review, and they were getting particular fields but not sure how to fill them in, like what does the jurisdiction mean, or who should I put here, or who's the signatory. So what we did was we actually automated the completion of them with sort of guidance along the way by sort of populating a questionnaire in Power Automate. And what that's meant, I sort of estimated, I did a bit of a survey to the team before we launched it, and I said, how many confidentiality agreements do you think you get asked about, or do you review weekly, and what's your average time? And so I worked out that I think our team spent somewhere around about, was sort of 60 to 70 hours a month, which isn't massive when, you know, we think we're sort of a team of 25 lawyers, but you know, that number is close to zero now in terms of on the origin term. So it means that I've sort of been able to free up that time. So it's actually the time that you're taking back for your team,
Yes.
can be measured and valued in that way.
Yeah, which is where we started, right? It's about freeing people up to, you know, get home to their families. We do the same thing with our document automation, and we actually measure in very similar ways
Exactly.
what the advantage is. And Terry's back. Do we have a question, or are we getting the wrap up at this point?
No. I've got a question for you.
Go for it.
And again, I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, if I may, but it's around really balancing the drive to capture the knowledge or information, as the case may be, versus, you know, making sure that you're not compromising anything around confidentiality or privilege, and how do we manage that? Because obviously a critical part of any knowledge management system in a legal practice of any sort. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, so for us, I think it is a bit of a judgment call, but lawyers are very good at using their judgment, Terry. And so I think, you know, if we're sort of talking about it in terms of just sharing within the legal team, there's a few no-go zones for some, you know, even within internal teams in terms of Chinese walls that all of our lawyers are sort of well aware of when we sort of start sharing things within the legal team. But by and large, that's a pretty safe space. So unless you sort of have flags, we sort of let our lawyers talk about whatever they want at the team meetings. If you're talking about knowledge that you're sharing, whether it be sort of a precedent or a guidance note for the business, it does have to be much more, I'm trying to think of the word, like made vanillaized. Can I invent a verb? And so I think there is a craft or an expertise in kind of distilling the very basic sort of binary guidance to give to the business that removes the need to sort of go down and cross any boundaries in terms of confidentiality or privacy. And it is a skill, but I think it certainly can be done. It's definitely, though, something that's important when you're preparing those kind of things like templates and guidance notes for the broader business, to sort of strip out, you know, that specific case studies that can be problematic.
Is that like front of mind? So is that something that would, you know, flash up as a warning, or something that would always just keep reminding people about that? Or is it just so pervasive in terms of one's consciousness that that's not necessary?
For me, it's probably just pervasive, because you want to, for something in the future, no two situations are ever going to be the same. So you are trying to make it generic, but it's hard to sort of have a one size fits all, because maybe what has happened, is going to happen again. So you kind of need to balance that, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think we need a whole other session on this, and it's a great question. So thank you for raising it, because in understanding how you can transfer knowledge, you also need to understand where you don't want to transfer knowledge, and you mustn't. So it is actually very connected. We have a data governance team that we work very closely with in knowledge management. There's a whole discussion around, and yes, it's pervasive, right? It absolutely has to be. But we would also, I think, want to point to areas of interest where you could kind of have a conversation around, are you going to have a pessimistic view or whereas an optimistic view in the terms of, are people going to be able to access things, absent ethical screens, of course, or not within your organisation? Do you need a knowledge broker who's going to sit within the middle of that, or not? Those are fundamental questions that each organisation will have a different appetite for, but they're critical to be asked as part of your knowledge management strategy.
Yeah,
it probably
absolutely.
depends a bit too on the audience. So, and again, the forum of the knowledge that you're sharing, again, if it's with your business clients. So for us, it's very different if we're putting a guidance note on the intranet, so 5,000 employees can access it, versus a bespoke template that's being used by a very small team that maybe go out and do very tailored negotiations with overseas US, startups, and they want something really technical. You can put a bit of guidance or be a bit more bold, or put some different positions in that one. So, and because there's like 5 people that are using the template, then you can sit down and have a call with them and explain it. So I think audience is also very important to that piece.
Really important, because again, it's that knowledge is contextual. Knowledge is not as the same value to everybody who's going to be wanting to access it. It's super valuable to those niche teams. Then what is the argument in making it available to everyone?
It speaks to the points that you folks were making earlier as well, I think, which is when you're looking at your knowledge and you're kind of putting your knowledge strategy together, know what you've got and know where it's going, right? And know who's going to use it, and etc. So it is thinking that process through a little bit from start to finish as well, isn't it? So great question from our audience. I'm going now. Bye.
That's okay. Well, we are almost we're almost at an end. We've got a nice practical tips. Caroline, start us on the road home.
Okay, so Katrina and I were talking about practical tips, and it was a fascinating conversation. So here's what we came to you with. First of all, just to recognise that knowledge is your ace. It is that the scope and value of your knowledge, as we've just been discussing, needs to be explicit. It is broad. Don't be constrained by the traditional areas that you think are, included in it. Challenge yourself to think a bit beyond it in terms of what's possible, particularly what's possible with technology now. I think building a business case, the really important things that you need to think about when building a business case are, first of all, culture. And we've talked a lot about culture. Culture is king. They always say culture eats strategy for breakfast. And in some ways it's true. You have to understand the culture that you're coming from and where you want to work within that culture to get to. And innovation is queen. Innovation is something that is going to drive the value, that commercial value that you're looking to come up with from your intangible assets. So think about how you're going to embrace and involve innovation in your business case. Katrina, do you want to do the next one?
Yeah, sure. So then we've got the jack of all trades. You've always got to be busy in the background thinking about things such as change management, transformation, how you're going to use your change champions, how you're going to motivate your team, incentivize them, how are you going to sort of build that continuous improvement, that maintenance piece. So a good knowledge management strategy always has that jack tinkering away, pushing things along. I like to call it the nudge, working in the background. Once you've bedded down your culture, once you've thought about all the different innovative tools that you want to use, you got your jack. You got to keep at it. It's ongoing. And then the final tip that we have is the rest of the deck. A few sort of tips that Carolyn and I think are just good to keep in mind. Firstly, avoid jargon. So knowledge management, it is a pleasure to talk about sometimes because it's not tech heavy. Like, it's really something that's innate to people, the way that we talk, the way that we come together. So don't get bogged down in the jargon. Use storytelling. It can be incredibly powerful. I hope you've seen that today. Caroline and I, we've tried to use a lot of examples from our experience because I think that really helps, bring people along for the journey and help them understand where you're going. It's a really powerful tool. Keeping it simple is very important. You can go down a rabbit hole, and much as Caroline and I love to when we talk about knowledge management, when you're starting a strategy with a team, keeping it simple is incredibly important, especially for in-house lawyers, where you'll have a very small window of opportunity to sort of speak to them and capture their attention before they sort of get back to their day jobs. We think it's important to keep people accountable. We talked about that in terms of, the precedents maybe that your team has. I talked about it in terms of a plan and just everybody committing to it and how we sort of track performance. And then it's important as well to think about your metrics. Are they metrics in terms of how many times you come together and share knowledge, how many precedents you want to update, what sort of systems you want to try and roll out, and how you're going to measure the usage of those systems within your clients. So there are our tips. Terry, I've seen you jump back on screen. We've got a couple of minutes up our sleeve. So are there any questions, or have you got anything that you wanted to ask Caroline and I before we wrap up?
I did. I wanted to ask you a super practical question, and I'm thinking from the point of view of if you're flying solo. So you're a one-person band in-house, or you're in a small law firm. You want to do all of the things that you've spoken about, because obviously it's increasingly critically important in our industry to do it. So where do you go from here? Because it could be a little overwhelming when you sit here and you look at all of this knowledge, and you've given fabulous tips on how to capture it and how to kind of start. But do you need initially to get a knowledge management person, a specialist on staff to do it? Do you need that person to be checking in regularly? And the other bit I'm throwing into this is just the reality of how incredibly busy everybody is on a day-to-day basis. But again, they're not going to get less busy by not managing knowledge. So where does that person jump in and kind of start with this? Do they need a special person? And probably a thought from both of you to end, I guess.
You want to go first, Caroline?
Yes, because I do have an idea. Sitting as I do as Director of Knowledge within a large law firm, I would just say to the in-house people who are in that circumstance, leverage your legal suppliers. Come, if we're your lawyer, call me or my colleagues in the other firms, because we would like nothing better than to help you. That would be the first thing. Leverage your network. Would be really important, but particularly leverage your legal suppliers, because you are the client, you have a certain amount of power with us, and we would be more than happy to have that conversation. Otherwise, I think it's just the old advice, which is start with a quick win.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my sort of take on it, I'd agree with Carolyn. If you've got a panel, a lot of them will have value adds, which can include sort of a knowledge management piece. So think about those opportunities. I do think if you're a sole practitioner, there still is value in documenting it to keep yourself accountable, and maybe share that document with whoever you report to. Make it one of your development plans for the year, or your own KPI if you really want to hold yourself to account. We do that. I have it in my learning plan. And I think, there are, I love Caroline's idea of quick wins, but I also have quick wins with some big rocks at the same time. And I like to keep them both going at the same time. The big rocks don't go away. I reckon they just get bigger. So, an in-house lawyer is kidding themselves if they don't think that there will be a tipping point where investment in, be it a precedent, be it some annotated guidance to an agreement that they see all the time and they're always having the same conversations with, isn't better than just doing it over and over. And it doesn't need to be perfect. So you can, again, put those sort of safety parameters around, think about the audience, put it in a draft, only share it with them in a meeting if you're worried about the nature of what you're saying in the document, but start somewhere, I think, because there's always advantages and time savings to do that in a really simple way.
Yep.
And share, don't hoard, right?
Yes.
That's the other thing,
That's right.
Collaborate. Tragically, we have reached our time, and I just wanted to thank you, Katrina and Caroline, so much for your contribution and sharing your experience. I think too, just absolutely amazing, and wanted to thank everyone for your questions and also for attending. I'm going to offer on their behalf, but I know it's okay because they're good with it, that Katrina and Caroline are open to you contacting them if you want to via LinkedIn. You'll certainly find them there, if not in other places. So if things occur to you, and often they do after sessions like this, do reach out to them, because I know that they would be more than willing to help. On behalf of the Centre, I would like to thank ACC LTIC for collaborating with us on this project, the first of many. I hope it's been an absolute pleasure to work with them, as it has been to work with Katrina and Caroline, and also Asha McDermott, who you saw at the very beginning. From the Centre's point of view, that aspect around collaboration is just so critical. We're all about basically looking at the trends in the marketplace and getting them out to people so they can actually do something with them in their day-to-day practice. So this was just an opportunity to do something that's near and dear to our heart, but core to what we do as well. So thank you again for that opportunity. If you're interested in other CLI, ACC, LTIC events generally, you know that they're on LinkedIn. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter. So please also don't hesitate to reach out to us there. So with all of that being said, again, fantastic session, Katrina and Caroline. Really, really appreciated it. And I'm sure we all look forward to seeing you in another session very soon. Thank you very much.